In business today, three things to know. First, is it a Santa Claus rally? And does that really exist? What to expect for the rest of the year? Then, move over Black Friday for Super Shopping Saturday. That's how the last weekend before Christmas was billed, but for retailers, it may have been a lump of coal. And Americans can't yet hit the beaches of Cuba, but a thaw in relations could help warm up a tourism industry that has high hopes for Havana. Arise Exchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. We'll get to the business news of the day, but first, this is a picture of the corner in Brooklyn, New York, where two police officers were shot and killed this weekend by a lone gunman who later killed himself. A memorial service is planned this evening at the spot. It is still unknown if New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and Police Commissioner William Braden will attend. We will have live coverage beginning on Arise America with Debbie Turner-Bell in about an hour, so stay with us. Now to business. Oil dropped better than 3% today, but the markets rallied triple digits as we head towards Christmas. Let's take a look at the final numbers. The Dow closing up better than 150 points to 17,959 as it crawls its way back to 18,000. The S&P 500 up 7 and change, and the NASDAQ, strong performance there, up 16 points. Some of the top stocks we're watching, a federal judge ruling that consumers who had their personal information stolen during Target's massive data breach can sue the retailer. Officials say so far 140 lawsuits have been filed in connection with that breach. Target closing up 55 cents. Oil services company Tesco slashed its outlook for the quarter after it says falling oil prices pulled back the demand for its drilling equipment. Shares of Tesco have fallen more than 31% this year. Tesco down another 70 cents to $12.90. And Facebook gives into pressure and blocks a page calling for the support of an anti-Vladimir Putin blogger. The page was set up to organize a protest for the opposition leader after he was charged with embezzlement. Critics say those charges are trumped up. No matter, however, Facebook stock is on a tear. That's a new 52-week high you're looking at, $81.45. And commodities, gold closing down 23 and change, and oil, as we mentioned, down again to $55.30 a barrel. Some key economic data out today. The National Association of Realtors says existing home sales dropped 6.1% to an annual rate of 4.93 million units. That's the lowest since May. Well, Jim Awad is the chairman of Plimsoll Market Capital back here on Arise Exchange to talk about this rally that we're undergoing, the, quote, Santa Claus rally. What is a Santa Claus rally, and does it exist?
Yes, it is a Santa Claus rally, and it does exist. It basically is a time of year where people tend to look at the glass as half full rather than half empty, and the economic data on balance is pretty good.
All that eggnog at the holiday parties?
Well, I think it's sort of the fundamentals actually in the short term justify it, because it looks like it's going to be a reasonable Christmas season. Inflation is low, oil is going down. Stocks are okay priced, and a lot of money managers are behind the market and are chasing stocks trying to catch the market.
Yeah, there's something called window dressing that goes on here a little bit, right? And so if you could talk a little bit about that and how that might color the picture a little bit.
Yes, absolutely, and that has repercussions for January. So something like 85% of managers are behind the market this year. And to the extent that you've been waiting for a correction that doesn't come...
That's amazing. 85% are behind a market that if you had simply played the indexes, you would be doing okay.
Yes, absolutely. This is a year where it paid to be low cost and passive. Now, there are some who are saying that next year you will have more volatility, and in volatility, active managers have a better chance. But the active managers right now don't want to show a lot of cash, are trying to juice their returns at the end of the year to close the gap. So the repercussion of that in January is you might get the other side of that. The market is melting up so much, you could get a little bit of a correction in January.
I like that word, melting up.
Yes.
Does any tax implications come into play where people, what they say is wash their losses basically by selling ahead of January to get the tax loss?
Well, that is particularly in down years in the market where you have a lot of losses. But so far, I think what you might see is people selling energy stocks and gold stocks, which are down for the year, to offset profits in other years. And that may be why gold and energy was down today in an up market.
How much is this a Santa Claus rally or a Janet Yellen rally, though? Because the markets really struggled until the Fed came up with a new word that they threw into the mix. We're going to be patient when it comes to interest rates.
Well, the big picture is that it's a Janet Yellen rally, and that will continue into next year. But for last week, this week, and next week, it's more of the Santa Claus rally.
Okay, so let's look at 2015 then. And you mentioned in January you might get a little bit of a softness, but overall, how does the first quarter sort of shape up here for equities on a broad scale?
Yeah, well, the U.S. is in good shape, and I expect our fourth quarter earnings reports will be good, and the guidance will be good, and therefore the line of least resistance for equities will be up to the extent there is risk. It's from problems being imported from overseas, because Europe is in a recession, Japan's in a recession, China is slowing down, Brazil's in a recession. And what you worry about is if oil keeps coming down, somebody somewhere will not be able to make a debt payment, whether it's in the U.S. or in Russia. And
when you say debt payment, are you talking about a sovereign wealth nation, or are you talking about a large company?
It's more likely to be an institution. I mean, I think that Russia probably has enough reserves, although you have to say that Russia and Iran and Venezuela are getting poorer every day that oil goes down. But it doesn't matter whether it's sovereign or corporate. It's more likely to be corporate. But what you worry about when you have this kind of dislocation in a commodity, and you push the lending market away from the banking regulated market to the shadow, untransparent market, that somewhere, sometime, like for instance, this morning you got a Russian bank going, the Russians were able to bail it out. But what you worry about is that there's a dislocation somewhere that spooks the credit markets, that flows back into the economy and the equity markets. So that's where the risk is. In the absence of that, the line of least resistance remains up.
Okay, Jim, Happy New Year.
And to you also.
Okay, see you in 2015. Okay. Well, speaking of the economy, retailers dubbed this past weekend as Super Shopping Saturday, the last Saturday before Christmas. Did the catchy name draw Americans into the stores? Britt Beemer is America's Research Group President, and he runs down the winners and losers this holiday so far. Britt, welcome to Arise Exchange. Welcome back.
Andrew, thank you so much.
As always, good to talk to you. So, generally speaking, surprised at how we did this past weekend? What were the numbers like?
Well, I thought there would have been more shoppers out, but it's what's probably the most interesting thing about this last weekend is that over 44% of shoppers didn't buy anywhere, which is an all-time high over the last 10 years. So Super Saturday may have had more dollars spent, but they sure didn't get nearly as many shoppers out on Thursday night and Friday for Black Friday. But we had over 60% of Americans buy sometime between 5 p.m. on Thursday night and noon on Friday.
Are people simply more organized, less procrastinators this year, or did fewer people go to the stores?
Well, Andrew, it's a complicated question from one perspective. We saw a new trend this year, and that is that for the last 10 years, 11% of consumers have been saying that they were going to buy just a few large gifts. This year, that number jumped to 21. And those few large gifts all happen to be early bird specials on Black Friday. Mm-hmm. So that 21% of consumers have been done ever since that weekend. So we really have seen a new consumer out there, very cautious, but also what I thought was most interesting is, even though I didn't have a question in my last survey, over 80% of people said they used a shopping list this year. And the last time I asked that question, that number was at 72%. So over 80% of consumers use a shopping list to control their spending.
When you say that people bought fewer but larger gifts, do people have less friends or less family? I mean, are they simply being a little bit more picky in who they're buying gifts for, and is that a problem?
Well, Andrew, what you have to think about is you have about 40% of American families that are struggling economically. Mm-hmm. So where that family might have a year ago bought one large gift and a few small gifts, this year they may have just bought a few large gifts for their family. I mean, it was very interesting to see one thing that happened, and that was the number of people who shopped on Black Friday, bought one or two or three early bird specials, came back in the market this weekend, and only bought children's clothes because that's what they had postponed from back-to-school shopping they were going to buy in December at lower prices. But it kind of tells you where the mentality is, and this year, keep in mind, only 63% of parents said they were done with their Christmas shopping for their children, and that's an all-time low in the last 10 years. So it just tells you that there's a lot of issues out there that are pressing a lot of consumers to spend less.
Well, and I was walking around the stores here in New York City this Saturday, and the giant Best Buy on the Upper West Side was virtually empty. And so I'm wondering, are more and more people, obviously they're buying online, are we expected therefore to see online sales much stronger this year? Meaning, did people rotate out of the stores and onto online, or they rotated out of the stores and stayed home?
Well, online this year grew. I mean, it grew from a pretty good number a year ago, but now you've got between 46% of consumers, 47% of consumers buying online. Just a few years ago, that number is in the low 30s. So I mean, that's been some growth. The trouble is it's hard to equate all that because it's not how many people are buying online, it's how much of their purchases are they making online. And the one thing we saw this year are those people that were experiencing a lot of stress. The people that were in that stress mode were buying more and more things online, and oftentimes they were buying gift cards and sending those to friends rather than fight the pressures of the long lines and crowds in stores.
I want to ask you about gift cards in the last 30 seconds we have or so. Though gift cards were a pretty strong item this year, though they in many ways are anti-consumer, aren't they?
Well, the bad thing is you know, it hurts the retailer because as the dollars aren't recorded until they're used. So the retailer, to get those dollars to be spent in December, not in January and February, have got to really get the consumer in the front door in these few days after Christmas, which is awfully tough because they got to give bigger and bigger deals. And last year, actually, more gift cards were actually redeemed President's Day weekend than they were the week after Christmas. So retailers have got a challenge ahead if they're going to meet their December sales.
And we should remind consumers that many of them have time limits on these gift cards, and the value of those gift cards go down a little bit. Britt Beemer, thank you so much.
But the store gift cards don't. That's their one advantage.
That's the store gift cards do not. Okay, that's a good point. Happy New Year. See you soon.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, North Korea's internet goes dark. Is this the start of a tit-for-tat cyber war? You're watching Rise Exchange.
Tragedy in Pakistan where Taliban gunmen launched a bloody attack.
They have never involved women and children in any war. This time they have.
Young children carried away in ambulances, a teacher burned alive. The images are absolutely gut-wrenching.
This is a heinous act. Some might even call it pure evil.
The real problem is extremism in the country, and that they're going to have to eventually take on all the extremist groups.
Hello and welcome to Arise America. I'm Debbie Turner-Bell.
Informative. Wall Street, more treats than tricks for Investors Friday as the markets closed out the week at record highs. Compelling. China is the world's largest economy. Of course, the numbers are a little bit milked. If you actually believed that drinking Red Bull would give you wings, you're about to collect $10. Tim Cook coming out as gay, being in the forefront, it shows that there's diversity in leadership. All business. It was the best day for the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ all year. Entertaining money daily.
We're in a slow growth but not a no growth economy.
Rise Exchange. Welcome back to Rise Exchange. American businesses have already started to strategize on tapping into the Cuban market once and if the embargo is lifted. However, our next guest says only certain businesses will thrive on the island because of the Cuban government. Small and medium-sized companies should avoid doing business in Cuba, and he says, and he will tell us why. We welcome Marco Vincenzio, Global Strategy Project Director. Welcome to Rise Exchange. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
All right, so let's start with the concept of the embargo. First, do you think there's going to be a lifting of the embargo, and what areas?
Very, very difficult. You have on one hand a symbolic move by the president, very symbolic one in terms of diplomatic recognition, but the embargo still remains intact. It can only be lifted by the Congress. With a new Republican Congress coming in particular Republican Senate coming in January, it's highly, highly unlikely.
Okay. So for the areas where there might be some movement, Americans, let's say you run a business now in the United States and you want to do business in Cuba. Yeah. Anything you could do to prepare for that?
Well, actually, there are American companies selling to Cuba and have been selling in Cuba for certain years, but you need permission from the U.S. government, and it's for specific sectors. American agricultural companies have been selling to Cuba, but they're offered no lines of credit, and it's just cash. They have to pay cash for what is sold to them. And I think for now, the status quo will remain that if you have something to sell to the Cuban government, you will need permission from the U.S. government.
Do you think, therefore, that big business are the businesses that are going to get involved?
If non-American companies that have been operating in Cuba tend to be the big ones, sort of like if you look in the tourism sector, Meliá, a Spanish hotel chain. They've been working there probably for more than 20 years now. On the commodities front, Canadian companies operating in the extractive industries, specifically nickel. So in terms of big companies, foreign companies operating there, they will continue to operate there. In terms of American big companies, over the years, they've been keeping a close eye on opportunities there. But once again, if there's not a radical change, if the embargo is not lifted, you still have that only avenue of getting permission from the U.S. government.
And you caution that small businesses should not get involved.
Very difficult. If you don't have deep pockets, you're not there for the long run, it's extremely, because what happens is that there's regulatory changes in the environment. These are not just American companies, I mean overseas companies, whether they're European or different parts of the world. When they go into Cuba, you're talking about a country whose the bottom line is any reforms or changes that might take place in the private sector is for one reason, preserve and maintain the status quo.
Well, and you're right. I mean, we should remember there is no rule of law. There is no law of contracts.
Exactly.
You can go set up shop there and they could take all of your property.
There can be contracts, but the problem is that there can be arbitrary changes to it.
Sure.
There's no legal certainty. I mean, small Cuban families that have been operating businesses or little hotels out of their homes, laws can change overnight.
Are you getting calls from clients saying, okay, I'm ready to go to Cuba and do business? Are you starting
For
to get
years, I've been asking questions about it. Yes, there have been calls have been made, but it's more out of curiosity than actually wanting to do business there.
Do you think that there's going to be a real opportunity in the next 5 years or so?
It all depends upon, I think in this case, it's more about the Cuban government. How much are they willing to open in terms of political change, economic change, changes on various fronts? Remember, Raul Castro made a speech in recent days after
Communism is here to stay.
Exactly. He says, and he made that clear, and he made that very unequivocally. He made that clear. So as long as the objective is to maintain the status quo, it's difficult to see any radical changes in terms of American economic policy or the lifting of the embargo specifically.
Okay, Marco, thank you so much for your thoughts
Thank you.
today. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah.
Okay, Happy New Year. Time now for our business ticker stories making headlines across the nation and the world. North Korea's internet is reportedly down, and that may have added more fuel to the fire as a war of words between North Korea and the United States escalates. In its latest threat, North Korea warns of strikes against the White House, the Pentagon, and, quote, the whole U.S. mainland. This comes after the U.S. formally accused the North of orchestrating a massive cyber attack on Sony Pictures. North Korea, meantime, denies it's behind the attacks linked to the film The Interview that features the fictional killing of its leader, Kim Jong-un. And instead, it says the U.S. administration was involved in the making of the movie. Meantime, Sony, which pulled the film amid threats against moviegoers, is now considering releasing it for free online. The blackout of Fox News on Dish Network continues. Both Fox News Channel and the Fox Business Network remain dark after contract negotiations between its parent company, 21st Century Fox, and Dish Network broke down over the weekend. Talk stalled when Dish refused an increase in subscription fees, and that's just the latest skirmish between cable and satellite providers and the networks over such fees. Wall Street has enjoyed its best year for initial public offerings since 2000. According to a report by Renaissance Capital, there were 273 stock debuts in 2014, up 23% from the year before, with new entrants to the U.S. equity markets raising $85 billion. And you got to be in it to win it. $3 billion, that is. Spain has launched the world's biggest lottery with a $3 billion jackpot. Spain's so-called El Gordo, or the Fat One, will be divided up among thousands of ticket holders. The top prizes are worth about $500,000 each. The International Bank of Somalia has become the first lender in Somalia to handle foreign transactions. As Grace Pascoe reports, bank officials say it's a sign the country is stabilizing after decades of conflict.
Getting your cash out of an ATM. It's an everyday experience for many of us. Here in Somalia, it's still a novelty. This one in the capital, Mogadishu, is the country's first and only just recently installed. It's a sign Somalia is open for business. And now a new bank is handling foreign transactions for the first time in over 2 decades. The International Bank of Somalia is housed in a brand new building with a brand new chief exec, Ahmed Hassan Yusuf.
In IBS, we are using international standards. We have risk management, we have compliance, we have anti-money laundering system, we have name screening, we have internal audit, we have external audit. We have all sorts of safeguards that makes us to connect to the world.
The civil war and more recently Islamist militant insurgency destroyed Somalia's banking system. After years of conflict, displacement and famine for its 10 million people, it's starting again from scratch. Accessing cash is now easier, according to one of IBS's first customers, Abdi Nasir Sheikh Ahmed.
Most Somali people are used to the Ashawala money transfer system. There was no recognised banking system. If I'm not wrong, this is the first bank that not only offers money transfer services, but international banking services as well.
With around 40% of Somali families relying on remittances from another country, ashawalas, or money transferers, cater for incoming foreign transactions. But no outgoing payments could be made until now. With most urban centres now free from al-Shabaab extremists, the government is in better shape to focus on Somalia's recovery. This long-awaited international bank is another encouraging sign that Somalia is on the way up.
Coming up, where's 200 million missing dollars? Our favorite person of the day may know. You're watching Rise Exchange. Stay with us.
There is a reason Africa is called the new frontier. What was once potential is now an opportunity ready to be seized. Once revered for our resources, today's wealth lies in our people. People who build the cities that shape the future. People who know an idea in one place means business in another. A generation for whom technology means there are no borders, no boundaries. We are the new lions in a brave new world, kings of the urban jungle. And there's a bank that puts the world in our pocket and the future in our hands. UBA, Africa's global bank.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention, not for the right reasons. Today, it is a British rogue currency trader, Joe Lewis, who has vanished along with $200 million. In what could be one of the biggest frauds in UK history, police are searching for Lewis, who was last heard from on December 3rd, along with 130 million pounds that he apparently lost in what looks like a clear pyramid scheme. Lewis's firm, JT Trading, invested money for a range of British citizens, including many professional athletes and businessmen, taking a minimum investment of $25,000. Over the past few months, many investors asked to liquidate their accounts as they grew nervous about the firm and Lewis. Well, they had good reason. First, Lewis claimed he was having trouble transferring the money from the United States to the UK. Then he blamed brokers for not giving him the money. And finally, 2 weeks ago, he threw in the towel, gave up, and admitted there was no money left. In fact, he said he had stopped trading altogether in 2009, and as of now, it appears Lewis and his Turkish wife are missing, along with any hope of recovering the missing millions. And so Joe Lewis is our favorite person of the day. Next, why Cuba may soon become, maybe, the next Caribbean hotspot for travelers. You're watching Rise Exchange. Stay with us.
Unrest continues in Ferguson, Missouri. Exactly what happened to Michael Brown Jr.'s memorial. The NFL fallout continues. Why does this video change the game? President Barack Obama met with congressional leaders today.
He does not need congressional approval to carry out the strikes.
The only language understood by killers like this is the language of force.
Do I want to have a draft? No, because I don't want to have war.
Hello and welcome to Arise America. I'm Debbie Turner-Bell.
Global. It's Monday, so it must be time for a new round of sanctions against Russia. Nigeria is open for business, and you are getting a handle on this situation. Compelling. Time for liquid lunch, things that make us want to drink. Could she have been separated at birth from, say, Grimace? All business.
Money's coming out of these countries, and that flow is part of what's driving the equity markets.
Entertaining money daily.
It's about reimagining.
Arise Exchange. We're going to talk more about Cuba now. Until now, Americans who wanted to visit Cuba had to line up for expensive charter flights or travel through Canada, the Caribbean, and Mexico. Well, under President Obama's new changes, travelers can go to Cuba without requesting a license from the Treasury Department. that is currently required. Now, this may reduce costs and allow more people to legally travel on their own and provide possibly a big boost to tourism. We shall see. Joe Diaz is the co-founder of Afar Media, which is a travel media company, publishes a magazine and some websites, and he joins us now. Like I said, Joe, I imagine the phone has been ringing off the hook saying, I want to go to Cuba.
It's an exciting time to talk about Cuba, and we're excited to talk about it. Yeah.
All right, so, I mean, you've seen traffic basically pick up, that people want to
there's a lot more interest now.
Why do you think people want to go?
Well,
because it's kind of like the forbidden fruit?
A little bit. I mean, and now that it's opening up, I think the time to go is now. You know, there's still some things to be seen. Who knows how fast it's going to open up? But right now is a great opportunity to go.
Now, for a while, you could go under certain circumstances, right? Journalists could go, family members could go, business groups could go.
Yeah, cultural.
I know a few people go, and I knew a pilot who used to fly charter flights out of Miami.
Yeah, and you know, also keep in mind that a lot of people still go illegally. So it's still easy to fly from Toronto or Cancun.
Is that illegal?
Yeah,
it is illegal for American citizens.
As a U.S. citizen, you're technically not allowed to do it, but you know, and it's hard to get numbers on how many go. But we've seen everything from 60,000 to 400,000 Americans travel to Cuba illegally.
Okay, so if you're in the travel industry, what segments of the travel industry do you think could see a pop if Cuba completely opens up to anyone who wants to go?
Great question. I think, you know, the cruise lines are really watching intently about what's going to happen. Cuba is a great place to cruise, and so I think a lot of U.S. cruise lines and the execs I've talked to at the cruise industry have said we're watching it intently. Tour operators, so U.S. tour operators are also watching, and then luxury hotels. I mean, that's another place where you'll see some significant investment.
So if you go to Cuba right now, what's it like staying on the island?
So there's not a lot of luxury options. It's, let's call it pretty authentic and real. There's a couple, but you know, there's also a lot of other different housing opportunities. There's, you know, stay-at-homes with, you know, locals and what have you. So there is a range.
That's actually probably a pretty fascinating way of doing it.
It is. You know, it's definitely experiential and helps you get beneath the surface and really try to see Cuba through a local set of eyes, which I think is another reason why the opportunity to go now.
All right, so Cuba offers beaches, but there's plenty of Caribbean islands that offer beaches. So what is the driving force, you know, to go see Cuba?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to Cuba for the culture. You're going to Cuba for the people. You're going to Cuba for the music. Lord knows they love to dance and listen to great music. And those are, I think, the big reasons why you're going to go to Cuba.
And so, you know, there are, when you get a lot of calls, is it Cuban Americans who want to go back to Cuba, or is it just regular folks who kind of want to go to Cuba?
You know, it's really travelers, experiential travelers who really want to see what Cuba's like before it starts opening up.
If it opens up.
If it opens up. But I mean, we think it will. It's just hard to tell how fast that's going to happen.
And what are the risks for someone who wants to go to Cuba now? Let's say legally, you know, are they dangerous?
Well, I mean, not really. I mean, you should be careful, and I think it's always good to have somebody on your team that knows what it's like to go there. So work with a travel advisor. We work with some of the best. Lauren Maggard at Jet Set World Travel, she sends a lot of people to Cuba. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another thing is it's really hard to get cash there, so you got to bring everything with you. So now you're bringing a lot.
And we should remind people that they trade in dollars.
They do.
I mean, they use the dollars.
They do. I mean, it's pegged to the dollar. Right. So it's the peso, which is pegged to the U.S. dollar. So there's a tourism currency, and then there's a local currency. But keep in mind that everything you got to bring everything with you, because you're not going to be able to get cash once you're there. The other thing to keep in mind is you're going to be off the radar. So what do you
mean off the radar?
So no access to real internet.
No internet.
They do have internet in Cuba. It's really slow, and for Americans, they can't really use email there. That gets shut down, and also your cell phone.
Give me a forecast. And what do you think in 5 years Cuba is going to look like for tourists?
Oh, that's hard to say. But you know what? I mean, I think it's going to be more open than it will ever have been. And I think you're going to start to see some of these bigger U.S. corporations moving in and planting seeds.
We have about a minute left. Tell me a little bit about the magazine, because it's a kind of an interesting concept.
Yeah, so Afar is all focused on experiential travel. Travel is a way to really get you beneath the surface of a place and see the world through a local set of eyes. We've got Afar magazine, afar.com, which is an experiential travel guide. It's really when you're thinking about planning a trip, you come to afar.com. And we do events around the world. Afar Experiences is something that we do around the world. It's an event platform. And we also have a nonprofit, Learning Afar. We believe travel is the best form of education.
An educational platform for kids.
If we can get young people out in the world at an early age, that changes them and the world for better.
Joe Diaz, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll have you back on as people maybe go to Cuba.
Looking forward.
Appreciate it. Tomorrow on Rise Exchange, the business of butts. I did say the business of butts. How companies are cashing in on demand for bigger backsides. Let's take a look at the markets once again. Triple digits for the Dow, up 154 points. Green arrows for the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ as well. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching Rise Exchange. We will see you here tomorrow. Stay right there.